Okay, I see participants joining. We're just gonna wait a few more seconds before we get started. Okay, it looks like, well, there's still people joining. I have some housekeeping stuff to go over to start anyway, so while people are getting settled in, we'll go ahead and get started with that. So first of all, on behalf of the Epilepsy Foundation of Wisconsin, we want to welcome you guys to this week's virtual meetup. Thank you for being here. As you can see on the screen, we're going to be talking about seizure alert devices this evening. But before we get into that, like I said, some housekeeping items. So please know that we are recording this. It will be up on our video library on our website as we continue. I know I said this last week if you joined us. Our website is getting updated, so we just ask, be patient, but we will have the VMUs up there as soon as possible, including this one and then some of the previous ones that we've done. Also, attendees on the call tonight, please know that you are muted and your videos are also off. But we do encourage you to ask questions. I know Patty talked with John and I, she's very open to answering your questions. So please feel free to submit them throughout the call or when we do Q&A at the end. That's fine. You can do that by the Q&A button on your screen, and John and myself will be monitoring that for Patty. So I believe that's all the housekeeping stuff. So my name is Alicia Thompson. Again, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm the program manager for the foundation. We also have John with us too.
Good evening, everybody. John Mirasola. I work with Alicia at the Epilepsy Foundation, mostly work with communications and client support services.
Great, thank you, John, appreciate it. So with us, our speaker tonight is Patty Schaefer. So Patty, I'm gonna do just a little intro on you. So Patty worked for many years as an epilepsy clinical nurse specialist at a comprehensive epilepsy center in Boston, Massachusetts. So she is an hour ahead of us. Is that right, Patty? It's a little bit later.
Yeah.
And as a senior director for the Epilepsy Foundation. And then she currently is a nurse consultant focusing on health education. Patty, we're really excited that you're joining us tonight. Thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it right over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you, John. And thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. As Alicia said, I've worked in epilepsy for many years, but I've also had epilepsy all my life. And though while my seizures have been able to be controlled with medicine, I can never get off it. And then my son had seizures growing up. Luckily, he was able to get seizure free and come off of medications for a while, now back on it. But I say this because I'm very in tune myself with the whole issue of needing to track and record seizures and what could alerts do, because I think that technology is so exciting. It can do a lot for us. But when you're living with seizures and it's part of your life, sometimes something technology that could make it easier is also hard, because many times we don't want to be reminded about the seizures day in and day out, or we think we're going to remember it and we make a note on it and then it doesn't get remembered or it doesn't get put together when we're going off to the doctor's offices. So, it's a real important topic to think about. Why do we need these devices? Is this something right for me? And then what are the different kinds of devices? And this is changing all the time. So I'm going to broach this tonight with you, which it may be very different in 6 months or a year. But I want to talk a little bit first about why tracking seizures is important. Now, we know that recording seizures helps us know what's going on, and that's critical, but it's also what's going to let us know if our medicines or whatever treatment we have works, but also it's going to let your doctors or nurses or other providers know if something's working. I did some research years ago with a colleague. It was some survey work, and when we asked people a very general question about how were they or how were their seizures, the answers were vague, just like the question. It was vague. And if you ask them very specific, like when was your last seizure, or are they more or less than last visit, it was an entirely different story. If you asked them how they were managing, it was vague. If you asked them a specific question about whether they're recording seizures, having trouble with medications, it got specific. So I introduced that concept to think about, if we want to be in charge of our epilepsy and we want to kind of help make things better, we need to try to kind of get as much data and information about ourselves so we can use that to relay it to others, and then to know what's working, what doesn't, and to get something better if what we have doesn't work. So tracking is real important that way. Yet tracking, in general, relies on our memories to record seizures. And memories are not always very reliable, particularly if you've had seizures that involve your memory. If you've had a focal seizure where you're not always aware, or postdictally, you're tired or confused, or you've had a full loss of consciousness, the question is, how much of that seizure did you or did you not remember? We do know technology is getting better and better, making it easier. But we then need to think about, well, is that the kind of technology that I want to use? And is that easier for me? Because using technology also requires a lot of other resources. So we'll talk about some of that as I mention these devices. And then the other big thing, as I say, is the devices and resources are not easily accessible. And that's part of also what we're going to change. So I'm going to introduce you to a few resources at the end of the talk. So I want to think about, how can they help us? What's the difference between alerts and detections? And what are the methods? And then think about, what do you want to do? And then I'm going to give you some information of the questions that we'll go over, and then how you want to use these questions when you talk to your healthcare team. Now, all these kinds of considerations and questions are already on a fact sheet, and it's called Considering a Seizure Alert Device. And that can be found on epilepsy.com, the website of the Epilepsy Foundation. So that's the national foundation. And so if you go to epilepsy.com and you look under Toolbox, it will be underneath there, I think under treatment. So that might be something you want to pull out and then take to one of your appointments. So let's just dive into this. So I already mentioned that devices can be used to record or track seizures, but it also can be used to record or track other stuff. Your medicines, did you miss them? Did you take more than you were supposed to? Do you have what we call a rescue therapy, or something to help abort or stop clusters of seizures, or when seizures last too long? Because those things are important. Do you know if your seizures occur at a certain time of day, or if you're sleep deprived, or if there's stress or you've been sick? Because those things can also be tracked. If you've got other health problems, are there changes in those health problems that can affect your seizures? So you can think about tracking triggers, medicines, other treatments, seizures, and just other, wellness or healthy things, because we're learning more and more about how fitness is important, about how our moods are important, and what might, when we might be at risk for low moods versus good moods, and all those things. So you can think about a whole host of things to track, should you want to. When we talk about alerting, that's the device that can let someone know, let you know, or let someone else know when a seizure happens. Versus seizure prediction is, can it predict in advance when a seizure might happen? So I'm going to jump in right now and say we're not at this point, but I'm going to talk about some devices and approaches of how we're trying to get there. Now, if you look here on the right, these are all the different kinds of things that are being used now for devices in epilepsy. I'm also going to mention in vagus nerve stimulator and responsive neurostimulator as a treatment, but what things that tracks. So write in the chat box if anybody has a VNS or an RNS or any implanted device, and then we'll talk about that for a few minutes too. So let's start with the question that I already raised. Do people with epilepsy record seizures accurately? So this is the article that this was from, and this has been a topic of a lot of discussion in healthcare because when we get medications or any treatment that's being tested and gets approved by the Food and Drug Administration, it has to have data, and you've got to say how many people did well, how many people there was no change, and are there side effects, right? And so all these trials are dependent upon the person self-reporting whether I'm having seizures or not. So if you've been part of a clinical drug trial, you've probably been asked to record seizures for 2 or 3 months before you take a new treatment, and then during and after. So do we record them accurately? Well, there was a study done here at an epilepsy monitoring unit that wanted to find out, do people record them accurately? And if they remind people, does that help? So it was what they call a randomized control trial. So that means they had 91 people as they were being admitted for the video EEG monitoring. They had focal seizures, and they were trying to diagnose the seizures or find out where they were coming from. And so as they came in, half of them, were just told to be recording their seizures, and the other half were told to record their seizures, but the staff also reminded them each day to record their seizures, right? Now, interestingly, what they found of all of the different events, so there were thousands of seizures recorded, right? So of all of the events, people did not report at least 56% of all of them that had been recorded from the 91 people. So over half of the seizures never got recorded. And they knew this because they looked at what did people write down versus what was recorded on the EEG. So they had the comparison of what actually happened versus what did the person write down. When you looked at just those that were the complex partial seizures, the other name is focal impaired awareness, 3/4 of those were not reported. And I actually think that's probably because those are the kind of seizures that you're confused with, and you're confused afterwards, or you may be tired, and so you might not even know that it happened. But also 42% of the tonic-clonic, or what some people call the grand mal. So those are the big events. You lose consciousness. If you're standing, you're going to fall. So even those, a number of them are missed. And 86% of seizures that occurred during sleep were not recorded. So why this is so important is that obviously seizures can be dangerous for all of us, but we have even the kind of big visible ones that people are not necessarily aware of or don't write down, as well as any kind, but then particularly those during sleep. And we know that unfortunately, seizures during sleep, we used to think no big deal, the person's sleeping. But we do know that seizures during sleep can be very dangerous. What happens if you have a seizure and you land face down and you can't breathe? And unfortunately, sudden unexpected death is when a person that can die when they're not supposed to. It's like no known reason for it, but that can happen more often when people have seizures at night than in people that don't have seizures at night. So that's why we're taking that real seriously right now, thinking about people who are having seizures during sleep. What can we do to prevent that? So what does all this study mean? It means people are probably having seizures more often than they realize. And I'm not sure that it's whether or not they forgot to record it, because in this study, when they were given reminders to record it, it didn't make a difference. So the question really is, maybe they don't even know when they happen all the time, that we think we do, but there's a lot that happen that we're not aware of. So with that background of the importance of seizures and knowing, getting things to help us, how can the devices help? Well, as I mentioned, it can help us learn what our brain and our body are doing. So does anybody use a fitness tracker, a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, and to track their steps or amounts of exercise do they get? So if you do, right? You are tracking your health, right? And that's a real critical part. You're learning what your body's going to do. Well, you're motivated to change something, and that's going to help you do that. Devices can also help us know when a seizure occurs, and that's the alerting part. As I mentioned, if we track things and write it down, we can detect patterns or triggers. But the question is, could a device detect when a seizure happens and then tell me what was going on? So I don't have to remember to write it, but maybe they could track my fitness. They could track what I was doing at the time and tell me what happened rather than me having to remember to write it down. If we know some of these things and we can see patterns or trends, we can get safer. Maybe we find out the time of day that our seizures might happen more often and take more safety precautions then. Or when we're going out alone, we might want to think about, geez, if my seizures tend to happen in early morning, maybe I shouldn't be going out alone during that time, and I'll get someone to go with me. If seizures happen at night, the conversation may need to happen about, what do I do? You know, is there someone there that can help me? Okay? It'll let you and communicate with your healthcare team and with your family better. So instead of just giving them a vague answer, like if they say, how are your seizures? When you go in for an appointment, you can say, well, you know what? I've had more. In fact, these records show that I had double the number that I had last month, you know, and you increased my medicine and it didn't make a difference. Now that's really important information, because then you have got real data to look at and say, geez, maybe this isn't working. Should we switch to something else? Right? So all of these things are reasons why these kinds of seizure devices could be used. So if you think back, way back when, we used to track time with a little egg timer. Now we use watches and other things. A lot of people, you probably do this. I know I do. You get paper, pen and paper, write it down. You might have a calendar. You might keep it on a notepad or in a journal. Oftentimes it gets written on side of napkins and you hope that it goes with you to the appointment. The gold standard is to have an EEG done. And this can look at that time. Are you having a seizure? An EEG, if you're not having a seizure, isn't going to tell you anything, but it could tell you, you know, is there anything going on at the time? So these are ways of tracking. Nowadays, we're going to talk about some smartphone programs where you can track it here. From any of these things, you can develop trends. So I mentioned how you could look at fitness or wellness or other things that are going on in life and track it to your seizures. And then there's ways to alert people. If anybody's still got an old-fashioned phone, you can call up somebody if you need help. But if you're confused, post-ic, or having a seizure, you can't call at the time. So the question is, that's where the alert is. If you have a seizure and need help, how can you get it? Right? So now, when we start with tracking, there's seizure diaries out there. So I don't know how many of you might use a seizure diary. Here's the paper example. You might use it on a web app, just on a laptop or a desktop, or you could use it on a mobile phone. All of the ones that are out there now, the electronic diaries, I believe all of them now are capable on mobile devices as well as on web applications. You have seizuretracker.com that can track all these things that I've talked about, or a number of them, as well as the My Seizure Diary from the Epilepsy Foundation. Patients Like Me also has that. These are the three largest ones. Epi Diary over in other countries. And then there also are some smaller ones available. But you could track and also print reports and make notes for yourself. But you have to put information in. You're not getting information fed to you at this point in time yet. Okay, so let's get into the alerting and detecting is what is built on to the tracking. So detecting means that you've got some kind of a device, right, that is going to receive data or signals. that suggest a seizure might happen. Okay? So if you had an EEG on, the signal would be the EEG, right? But how many of us are going to walk around with an EEG on, right? So you've got to have some other signal that is going to suggest that a seizure may happen. So that data could come from changes in movement. So there's what we call accelerometers like that. And if you fall, so it can pick up the changes in your position that could detect the seizure. It could be repetitive shaking movements. So that happens with the motor seizures, most typically tonic-clonic seizures, but some of the focal seizures that have repetitive jerking in it. They also, many of these devices now record heart rate, skin temperature, sweating, because those things happen more often in seizures, but also can be easily measured. So right now, the most reliable symptom that can detect a seizure, because all these things have been tested on it, is the muscle movements. So if you have seizures that cause falls or changes in movement, such as the repetitive shaking, such as in a tonic-clonic, those are the ones that the devices at the present time can most reliably measure, right? But all of the devices, or not all of them, many of the devices are collecting all of this other information to try to use what we call the machine learning, so that to try to see, can they learn out of large numbers of seizures how often heart rate goes up, how often there's changes in temperature, and all of those other things, and can they get it to the point that they could pick up changes that would say this person's having a focal seizure, this person's having an absence seizure. We're not there yet, but that's what they're really trying to work on. Okay? Now, when you collect all this data from whatever the device you're using, it's stored, analyzed, and feedback. So the feedback can come to you with saying, gee, it detected something. Did you have a seizure? If you don't respond, it could send an alert or notice to someone. Your provider, your doctor, nurse, or whoever, could also have what we call a dashboard, and they could look and say, aha, Julia looks like, she's coming in for an appointment today, and I look back, and since I last saw her, it looks like she's had 5 episodes. So of these detections, I wonder if those are seizures, and then they can talk to you about that. So your healthcare team can get feedback as well. None of the devices I'm going to explain are 100% reliable, or nowhere near 100%. And so we're going to talk about that too, but you can get this feedback about the events that are likely seizures. Once that feedback, the things are collected, the data is collected, an alert system will tell you or someone else that you allow, and you tell the device to contact. They can contact them to say, okay, Julia, we think had a seizure, or her alert went off. Now that could be by a text, a phone call, an email. It depends upon the device. It depends upon what you ask the device to do. So what their capability is and what you want them to do. If you live alone, you don't have someone to send an alert to. I know that some emergency departments, kind of whether you're a fire department or police, handles 911. Some small towns would allow the devices, the alerts to come there, and they could call. That's something you'd have to work out with your individual emergency response team. But in any case, what happens is this can allow someone to call you. And if you don't answer, they can send someone to check on you. And it could be someone in your own house. So instead of someone being afraid to go to sleep at night because they think that, my child tends to have seizures at night, they can go to sleep and they're going to be woken up with an alert if a seizure happens, right? And then they can go provide the first aid and help them. If they need a rescue therapy, they can give that. Or if an emergency room needs to be called, if the seizure is not stopping. So that's what the seizure alert does for you. So here's a graphic I took from this article that I just basically shows you what I talked about. You've got a device, and here it's a wearable, watch. It's tracking some data. It's not going to track an EEG from here, but I mean, you could track any kind of data. It's then going to get transmitted to a place in this day and age. It's going up to the cloud where it's being stored and processed. Its feedback is going out to wherever you wanted it to go to. And then an alert is going to a family member, a friend. And then if need be, someone can call and have help come to you, right? So it can be contacting someone in your home, someone with you, your own phone, or someone else. So that gives you the picture of what the seizure detecting and alerting is. So let me give you some examples. So we think about wearables. I know I use an Apple Watch. I've tried different ones. This one just seems to work for me. Smart Monitor, it's called Smart Watch by Smart Monitor, was the first wearable out. And they had these watches, so you would get them from, you would get them from them. And then it could detect repetitive shaking. And then it could alert you or alert someone else. It saves the data. A physician or someone could look at it after the fact. Now what they've done is they've made it as a software, downloadable software, so you can go to the Apple store and it can be downloaded. I think it's Android and Apple, and it could be downloaded onto your watches, so you don't need to buy something different. It's software that can be downloaded, but then the whole alert system and everything else still works. So these are primarily for the repetitive shaking. EpiWatch is another type. It can also works primarily with the repetitive shaking. And actually, all of these are. However, I think what's important to point out is that they are all monitoring those other vital signs or other things that I told you about. They're just not reliable enough yet to know what that means. All right, but it is tracking it. So you can look at, was I, because skin temperature can be, or heart rate can be a sign of stress. Was I having a fast heart rate at the time? Was I running? Was I doing, different things? So it can detect other stuff. EpiWatch does all that, lets you record other things, but then it has a little quiz in it where it asks you to respond afterwards. And the goal is to try to see, can you test, by the way, a person's ability to respond to questions, whether they're postictal and whether or not that correlates to whether they had a seizure. This is the Embrace 2 watch. That's another device. Initially, they were hoping this was going to be able to detect focal seizures, but the data really is it's only approved now for those detecting, again, tonic-clonic seizures, but it does all the same things that I've talked about, and it has its own little diary in it, so you can get the feedback, as can your providers, right? Now, this is just a little bit more about the Embrace and the smartwatch. I think I said most of this. Yeah. So one of the things that I didn't point out is that all of these right now have GPS locators, right? And that's really important because the goal, if you can have something like this, is that it allows you to be free, get up and do things and not have to be tied down and dependent, and you can't go anywhere on your own. So again, this is depending upon your seizure frequency and everything else. But if you have your watch, can you go other places? And then if you have a seizure, it could alert someone. I had a patient that I worked with, a man that I worked with that was a runner. So we got in this watch because he had seizures running too often. And then he had a seizure when he was running, but the GPS location went off and his wife was able to track him down and get him help. So, it allowed him to go do what he wanted to do, but he got the help that he needed as well. Now, there are other kinds of devices that are video based. So what about the person who tends to have seizures at night? So this is it used to be called SAMI Alert. I think it's just called SAMI now, but it's a sleep activity monitor. So it can record different kinds of things that happen during sleep, not just seizures, but it does record the abnormal movements at night. So it can detect any kind of movement, tonic-clonic seizure, but even some of the movements that might happen in a complex partial or focal impaired awareness seizure. And it has audio as well as the video recording, and then that's sent to a smartphone or I think iPod touches still might be there, and then does the same thing, sends an alert. There's a place that you could look at it later, or your doctor or nurse could. So the benefit of this is that if you have events that you don't know if they're seizures, now you have a video recording of it. And then you can really, instead of just trying to find words to describe a seizure, you can have the video recording. So now you know what a seizure looks like, your family does, your doctor does, and you can better treat it because you know what you're treating. Now, there are some other ones that are in development. There are some other video systems. This MedPage seizure detection system, I think is from the UK or over in Europe. This has a whole bunch of different kinds of medical grade devices. One of them's a video type, but this one's a movement sensor that's placed under the mattress. So it can detect convulsive seizures, but it also has other fall monitors and it can video or observation things. And they're all available for children, different weight ranges, adults, and so on. The MFIT movement monitor has been around a long time, started in the UK. They now have a US based company, so it's easier to get here, and that's epiusa.net. That's placed on the mattress, but under the sheet or something in it. And that detects the muscle spasms or repetitive shaking that lasts at least 10 seconds. I don't know how long that needs to last for the MedPage. And so then again, does the same thing. It detects it, it records when it's happened, it sends an alert out. What's different here is that the watches and those other video things depend upon the Wi-Fi or the internet access. This is a standalone unit and it can get recorded right in here. Now, to transmit, you may need to have the Wi-Fi, but you don't necessarily need that to record. Now, I just am planting that in your mind. All these different things are different resources. So you need to think, do you have internet access? Is it only Wi-Fi? Do I have, the landline, cable access? All those different things will play a role into what kind of device might work for you.
Patty, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Regarding the devices that you just talked about that are still in development, is there do you know any data or any time frame when those might be available by chance?
Well, there is another here, EpiAlert, this is new from a new startup. It does not predict, it just detects and alerts, the same thing that all the others do. But it's actually sensing a lot of other different things as well. And that's being tested. So if you want to get involved with some of these, you can get involved with them. And that's why I put these websites on it and actually be part of studies as while they're going on. And the EpiAlert has led to another one, which I'm going to mention in a bit, but an EpiMinder, which is trying to get us from recording to detecting. And that's actually probably going to be rolling out within a year or so, right? Let me, when we get a little further along. But again, all these that I've mentioned so far have been around for a while. They've got published studies. So you can Google them, you can go to the websites, you can read the data on them. These other ones you can try as part of research studies and be using it for your own purposes, but you don't know how well it works overall yet. So when we think about EEG based, now primarily if we're going to diagnose whether a person's having seizures, or where the seizures are coming from, then they're admitted to the hospital and they have the EEG long-term monitoring, and there's video cameras, et cetera. And when you're doing that for a number of days or a week or so, and definitely if you need to have medications lowered, it's going to be done in a hospital for safety's sakes. Because 9 times out of 10, the minute you want a seizure to happen, it doesn't happen. So you need to withdraw medications to try to increase the likelihood that you'll capture the seizures. But there are times that you want to record seizures in the person's own environment, right? And someone that might have seizures at predictable times, you want to have it in their environment. Or they're having events and you don't know if they're seizures. So recording them when they're going about their day-to-day business, you're more likely to have it happen. And then you can look and see, was that a seizure? So we've had ambulatory systems around for quite a while, 25 years or plus, but they've been complicated ones and plugged in, and they still need the setup with all these wires. So the ones that are being based now, and I just picked a few different ones to give you an example. These are things that can easily be done at home. This is a Zeto headrest, and this is a wireless dry headset. So there's all these little connections along here. No paste or glue is needed. And this thing can be put on your head and fixed in under 5 minutes. It can be used at home for hours. It can be used over a number of days. Obviously, don't wear it in a shower and things like that. But it can, and it's comfortable. I've actually put one on my head to try it. It's pretty easy to use, and you don't have glue and all that. So you could have this done at a doctor's office. It could be sent home with you. And there are some other ones I've seen at, exhibits and things that are being tested, all different ones. But this is something I think we're going to be seeing. It is available now. It's been cleared by the FDA. This is, if you go to the website, you can get it, but you might also be having a doctor's office using it, This is the typical EEG. But if you can see this, and I'm sorry if this is dark, I took it from the website. Can you see this about 1-inch little square on the person's forehead? That is an EEG electrode. And that electrode can get a very good recording of the EEG from here. And it's placed just there or shortly behind the hairline. And you can get pretty good EEG on it. And what's happening now is people who are making this are also trying to work with other companies to try to say, can we capture enough information, do this with home EEG monitoring, and capture all these other biosensors to see, can we detect other kinds of seizures and not just these convulsive seizures that have been recorded by all these wearables so far. So this is a way that you could just monitor an EEG at home, but eventually might also be able to pair with some of these other sensors. This is an example of a subscalp electrode. So this little electrode is being put underneath the scalp. And then it has a little processor and a tiny, tiny thing. It looks like a little hearing aid that's placed behind the ear. That's the processor. All the information goes in here. So a classic example, recording EEG, matching it with heart rate, with all of these other kinds of senses to then see, can we get to a point of being able to predict? This is one of the things, it's happening over in Australia, and it's really going to be fascinating. The goal, it's not going to happen this year. I mean, this is still a few years out, and I'm going to say a caveat, I don't know how long it's going to be. I'll probably know more by the end of this year, but this is getting us to the point of seizure forecasting. Can we tell what's going to happen? So if I look at the weather report for tomorrow, I could plan my activity. If I could look at my seizure report, could I plan my activity to see what's the likelihood I can, I don't know, go for a bike ride tomorrow, or I want to go out with some friends. Does it look like, I might be able to do that tomorrow, or should I have somebody with me? Now, I know this might sound kind of crazy. So for this to be really working, it needs a lot more research, but they've been collecting over the past, I don't know, at least 3 years, all these different information and sensors, putting it together and making these devices to try to see how you could do that. And I think once they put all of this together, capture enough, we'll ultimately get to a seizure forecasting type of scenario. That's farther down the road than the prediction. So 2 things I just want to mention, then I just want to open up for questions. So there are different implantable devices. So we have a deep brain stimulator, we have the RNS or responsive neurostimulator, the VNS. I pulled out these 2 to mention because they are they're responding. So they're detecting something and responding to it. So the vagus nerve stimulator, as you know, as it works now, is that you have an implanted device. It sends stimulation on predetermined time elements that the doctor or nurse, programs the device. So it sends off stimulation to the vagus nerve, which goes up to the brain. And it could be every 5 minutes. Sometimes it's programmed to be a lot sooner than that. But now what happens is we know that in over about 70 to 80% of seizures, you see this sustained increase in heart rate before the seizure. So the VNS has the capability of tracking, it's the increased heart rate. And if they see that pattern of the increased heart rate, it sends an additional burst of the stimulation to it. And the goal is to stop it for the seizure from happening, or if the seizure has already happened, so you've got the heart rate increase and the seizure starting, to try to abort the seizure. So this is an example, and that's actually why people are tracking heart rate through all these other means that I've mentioned, is that we do know that heart rate increases prior to seizures. In the VNS, they've built it into their VNS system, right? And then the other wearables are trying to do it by tracking it. But so far they don't have something to respond to. They just want to track it and then alert. This is tracking and then responding and intervening. The RNS has these EEG leads. So these are electrodes that are placed under the bone and on top of, or just right underneath the surface of the brain where the seizures are coming from. So this is done only in someone when medicines don't work and when seizures come from either an area of the brain that you can't operate on, or more than one area of the brain. So if there's 2 areas and you can't operate in 2 different areas, and then those electrodes record the information directly from the brain, send it to this processor, which is under the skin, but in the skull, so you can't see anything, right? And what happens is, this is a picture of an EEG that's being recorded. And now it's recording and it learns your brainwave patterns. So this is an example of that, intelligence of devices. It's learning what it's recording and says, aha, this is a seizure. And then it delivers a stimulation to stop it. So here's the delivery of the stimulation, and this seizure stopped. So again, this is something that tracked it, and then it's intervening and it's responding to it. It can also send out alerts, I believe, okay? And it sends out information to the doctors who are programming it, and they can see how many times this went off and how many seizures the person had. So this is just, again, this is a big and burgeoning field. There's tons of new companies. Every time I look them up, there's more out there that are trying to kind of find the best answers. We've got some answers here, but a lot of questions. So Alicia, what I want to do now is kind of tackle some of these questions, but also have you go to the chat or the question thing and pull out questions that people in the audience might have as well.
Sounds good.
Right. So the first thing I would say that you need to think about, and if you want to talk about a device with your doctor, nurse, or whomever you see, you have to think about what do you want it to do, all right? And with that is what type of seizures do I have, and will it detect those kinds? So if you do not have seizures that do not have motor manifestations, shaking or something, then these wearables to detect a seizure are not going to work. All right. So in that case, you want to look at a device that could help track them. So you could record that. You could maybe capture a lot of data into it, but you're not going to be able to have it really respond back to you and alert if you don't have the right kind of seizures. Now you could be using it, or actually, let me give you, you could use the video one if you're at home for people who are homebound or seizures that occur at night. If there's some movement during it, you could try one of the video ones to see if it captures that video. And then that saves it, and you know, because you can look at it the next day. So that would be something to look at if you don't have, you know, a full tonic-clonic seizure or the repetitive shaking. You got to think about your living situation. If someone lives with you, you've got a care partner, a spouse, you know, child, parent, you know, then would you have the alert go to them? If you don't, then the question is there someone, a friend or someone who doesn't live with me, that I could have an alert sent to them and they could pick up the phone and call me? And if I don't answer, then I could, you know, process an emergency response if I'm repeatedly not answering. So that's one of the things to think about. Can you use the device? If I'm alone, is there someone to alert? But do you have resources and technology? Do you have internet access? You know, if you need Wi-Fi, you know, do you need Bluetooth? You need to make sure you have all of that, right? Can you use it outside of the home or only in the home? The video is going to be only in the home. So if you want to be out and about, then whether it's at work or wherever, is it mobile friendly? Is it battery powered? Or is it something that I need to have plugged in? You know, and if it's battery powered, does the battery last long enough? If I do go out of the home to work or to school, will the battery last long enough? So you need to know that. And I would say whatever you get, whether it's to track or anything, get GPS to determine location. Even if you just carry a smartphone, because carrying a smartphone, even if it doesn't detect, but someone tries to call you and they can't reach you, someone could, and if that was, you know, someone who thinks that you're having an emergency, you could feasibly find your location, right? So those are some of the initial questions. But then there's the personal ones. You know, what kind am I willing to use? Like, do I want someone to record what I'm sleeping? You know, what do I do during my sleep? I don't know if I want someone to record that. And that would depend upon, you know, what you had for seizures, right? And so, and if you slept with someone, does that person mind being in the video? So there are personal things. Is it comfortable to wear? Whether it's a watch or, you know, one of those subscalp electrodes, is it comfortable? You know, will it make me stand out, or will I feel too embarrassed? If it's something like just one of those EEG based, those are used to be used only for short periods of time, not forever, but for periods of time, for hours or a day or two or up to a week to see what's going on. So it's not something all the time, but you need to find out how you feel about that. Do you have concerns about privacy? I know I would. So the question I'd have is that, well, can only I look at this data? Or who else is going to look at it? If it goes to my doctor's office, can anybody look at it there? You know, maybe I don't want that to happen. And if you're going to have a family member, you know, have access to it, you need to have that discussion and saying, you know, I'm adding you to this because you help me, but I don't want you talking about me to other people, not to other family members or not to other people. So you've got to think about your privacy. And you also need to say, is it going to be shared beyond your regular care? You should not participate in something like that if it's going to be used for research unless you know it. And I think being part of research is great because that's how we get all these advances. But you need to know what's going to be involved there and consent for it to be used in research. You don't want to just be using something and find out after the fact that someone's doing it. And also be aware that all these things I'm talking about, at least as far as I know now, no one's looking at the data in real time. When I say there's portals that your doctor or someone would have access to look at, they're not sitting in front of the computer and saying, oh, Julia's just came up. She's having a seizure right now. That's not happening. They can look back and say, what's happened since I last saw that person, right? Or if someone's in the hospital, they can look right there, but it's not going to be used that way on an outpatient basis, at least now. And then cost. How much does it cost? Right? Some of these are pretty expensive. Some of the wearables, $250, $300. Some of them have subscription rates. So a monthly fee pays for cloud storage of the data, of the analysis, of all of that other stuff, the alerts. You know, so you've got to think about that. And some insurance companies will cover it or maybe reimburse you for some. But to be honest, be prepared for a nightmare to try to get an answer to that, you know, from your insurance company. Some of the people who make these will help you work with the insurance. Others, it's totally up to you. So you need to think about all of these different questions here and also make sure that it's right for you in terms of your age, your size. If you're doing this for your kids, you've got to think clearly, is this something for a child? You know, a child that has seizures at night, and definitely for a baby, the videos and the mattress pads are awesome. I mean, that would be the first thing I'd use. I wouldn't think about something on a watch for them. And then lastly, I want to stress, the devices do not prevent sudep. Sudep is that sudden unexpected death in epilepsy that I mentioned in the beginning. A lot of people think that it does, and they talk about it, but what it does is it tracks the seizures. And since the seizures often, not all the time, but are often thought to happen at the time of a sudden death, some people equate by detecting a seizure at preventing sudep, and it's not. But if it can help you get better control of your seizures, then getting better control of your seizures, getting from whatever means of tracking and alerting, getting help to you sooner, then that is what can help prevent sudep. Getting quick help if you're having a seizure, you know, and that first aid to you as soon as you can, that can help. Having no seizures, that can help prevent sudep, but a device itself we're not there yet. So what you can do to learn more about the different devices is the Danny Did Foundation is actually very involved with sudep, but they keep track of all these devices. They also have they can help with funding for some of them. So you can contact them if you need help with funding. The Epilepsy Foundation on epilepsy.com has this fact sheet on what to consider. And then they also have what we call a devicepedia. I'm sure everybody's heard of Wikipedias, right? Well, a devicepedia the foundation created is they've opened this up. It's found on epilepsy.com. If you look under About Us, Research and New Therapies, it's underneath there. And they've opened this up all to researchers and companies to send in their information about what they have or what they're developing. So here's where you can go to find out what are people testing and working on. And all the information is verified. Now, I can't tell you that promise it that it's up to date every month. I mean, it's kept as regular up to date as you can, but that's how researchers, clinicians, anybody, the general public can go and see what's happening in this field. What are some of the other devices? And if you know of a device that's not there, then contact the foundation or contact the manufacturer so they can get the information added to it. What the foundation is also working on is what we call, how can you put all the digital health together with artificial intelligence or big data? And can we mine this data, learn from people with epilepsy to come up with the way to predict and forecast? So I mentioned earlier about, could you forecast like the weather and forecast how your seizures are going to be tomorrow? Well, another way to think about it is, could you ask a question of a digital platform to say, what's the likelihood that this new drug would work for me? So these are two programs, Nile Company, and then Eden, which is from the Epilepsy Foundation, Epilepsy Digital Experience Navigator. Both groups, but they're doing it in different ways, are trying to look at a platform where people can put in data about themselves, link some of their medical records to it, and have access. You know, their medication data can be put in there. If they have devices, they can share device data to it. And then they can query it and say, okay, I've been on ABC drug. What's the likelihood that this new one would help me? Now, if you had 10 people in there, you're not going to learn anything. But if you had thousands, 50,000, 100,000 people of data in there, that's how they can predict and say, based on this type of seizures, this is the chance that this drug might help. So you could be going in there, just imagine as an individual, if you participated in something like this, you could go in there and you could say, gee, my Fitbit is showing that I've been depressed, or I need to exercise more, and I'm having these seizures and I'm on this medicine. What can I do? And it might be able to say, here are some medicines that could help improve mood and seizures. Have you tried this? Or here is some information or where you can go to learn more about this problem. Or here's a program that could help you with this area of your life. So it's a way to learn from digital health, what might help you with your epilepsy care, but what might help you with other things, you know, as long as you help share your data, pop it all in there.
Okay. Patty, we had a couple questions here. Let's see. First of all, is there a specific device that is safest or best to use at night?
So there's nothing that I could say that would be safest, all right? Because none of them are actually doing anything to you. I mean, the treatment ones is, you know, it's giving the stimulation, but the others is they are taking information from you. So there's not going to be side effects per se for like that. But what's going to be best is what works for your situation and your type of seizures. So if you have seizures with motor manifestations, a wearable will work if you can wear that at night. The video one could work, or a mattress one could work. It depends upon what. I know of parents, they use it for their kids. The mattress ones are used, and those are very popular over in Europe and over the United Kingdom. I think as Americans, I hear more about the wearables. But I would do the research on the different ones, look up some of these, and then see what works for you.
And if there's another question that came in, if I have a wearable that needs to be charged, is it a good idea to get one of the apps as well, or one of the apps needed?
So, so if you get a wearable like a watch, you're going to have to charge that. Like I take off my Apple Watch and I charge it up, you know, in the morning while I'm having a cup of coffee and set for the day, you know. So that's what you need to do probably with any of these other ones. Now, these things would have everything on it, as well as would your phone, would have an app device on it, so it could be synced with Bluetooth and things like that. So you need to plug them in, charge them, so when you have it ready, it's available. Now, if you bought the Embrace watch, that has everything there with it. The smartwatch is trying to save time and saying, hey, people are buying their own smartwatches now. Why do they have to have one just for epilepsy? So let's give it the software that they download. So there you wrap it into your watch. The Embrace, the EpiAlert, a couple of the other ones, you've got to buy that product. So that might mean having two different watches if you like, another SWAT watch.
Okay. And for another, let's see here, why do EEGs require the hospital for stimulators? What kind of equipment is required that can't be made smaller or more efficient somehow? And I think that's going to have to be our last question for tonight.
All right. So when you go into the hospital for it, it's because we need to find out real detailed information. Now, actually, let me back up. We want to diagnose whether or not someone's having a seizure. The gold standard is to see the event as well as record it on an EEG. So it used to be the only way to do that was in the hospital. Or if you try to record it, and again, a watched pot doesn't boil, so you have to lower down drugs. It's not safe to do at home where someone's not there to help you if your seizures go on too long and you get into an emergency. So that's why you're in the hospital. Those kinds of things, if you don't have to withdraw drugs and you just want to find out, is that event a seizure? Then you could look back at any of these kinds of things and say, could something like this be done at home? So they are trying to do it smaller, easier, no glue wires. Now, if you want to find out, are you a candidate for surgery? That is a totally different thing. Or are you a candidate for RNS or VNS? Because you need many more channels, more detailed look, and you've got to find out where in the brain it's coming from. Not just, is it in the brain, but where?
Okay, terrific. That's going to have to be our last one for tonight. There are a couple questions that didn't get answered, but for those of you who did send a question in, if you could please maybe copy it and send it to us. We can
just send it to me and I'll answer it. And if, it's up to you on a schedule. I'll stay on if you want me to answer a few more now. It's up to you.
No, that's okay for tonight.
Okay.
John, I typed in the Connect email, so people can use that email. I typed it in the chat for everybody. You can use that. Yep, and the phone number as well, for any questions that didn't get answered.
Okay, well, terrific. We'll get the answers back to you. And Alicia, I'll let you close out here.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you, first of all, for joining us tonight. Patty, thank you for your time. I know it's a little bit later in your part of the States. We appreciate your knowledge. This was incredible, a lot of information. So, like I talked about, we have recorded this and it'll be up on our website. As I said, just be patient with us. We're in the process of updating it, but you can go back and listen in case you missed something or you have other questions, you can go back and view it. But yeah, with that, I think that's it. We just really appreciate your time, Patty. So thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure. It's nice to be here with all of you anytime.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.